Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, our guest is Angelica Griegel. She is a toxic relationship expert and coach who helps men and women both heal from narcissistic abuse and heal their own dysfunctional relationship patterns so they can finally have the healthy relationships they've always dreamed about. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology from Columbia University and has licenses in counseling and health education as well. So thank you so much for being here. If I did butcher your name, please feel free to say it again and let people know.
You did it correctly.
I did. I'm glad that you're here. Okay, so let's start by telling us more about the work you do.
Yeah, so I work with both men and women who have a history of toxic relationships. And these people usually come to me knowing that they too are part of this toxic relationship dynamic. So, they might not be the quote unquote, we'll say abuser, but the way that they are showing up in the dynamic with the abuser is dysfunctional, and they know it, and they want to change the way they show up in the relationship so that they can have not healthy relationships with a toxic person, but in all other areas of their lives, like including their friendships, their family members, because usually somebody in a toxic relationship is showing up in a disempowered way in other relationships as well.
Okay, awesome. Not awesome about people having toxic relationships, but being a therapist myself, I know that it often can happen, and it's good to have people like you to help.
Yeah. So it's mostly emotional abuse that my clients go through, or even lately, my clients have been coming to me saying, I think I'm the toxic one. And, they're being, I put toxic in quotes because they're being that way because of trauma that they experienced in the past. And it's showing up in a way that's considered toxic for some.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if a lot of the people you treat or their partners have histories of abuse, because that would be my guess. Is that what you're finding?
Yes, and I say that, a lot of people come to me saying, I don't have any trauma, but they actually don't know what trauma is. They think of it as physical abuse, or their parent was an alcoholic, or whatever it might be. And they don't think of the smaller things that could be considered trauma.
Like emotional put downs.
Yeah, emotional. I mean, some of the things that come up in my sessions with my clients could even be like a parent rolled their eyes at them a lot. And, as a result, that made them feel less than. Because it's all about how a child internalizes the behaviors that are occurring in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And then that leads them to believe something about themselves, like I'm not enough, or I'm not seen, I'm not heard, all those things. And then as a result, they show up in their adult relationships still having that identity.
Right. Exactly. And when it came to working in a particular area that you selected dysfunctional relationships and toxic behaviors and narcissism, was there something happened to you in your past or relationship in your past that led you in this direction at all?
Yeah. So I was actually in school for clinical psychology, and I didn't think I had ever experienced any type of emotional abuse or toxicity or dysfunction in my life before. And I ended up dating somebody who we had what I would call a toxic relationship. The dynamics between us were very toxic. And that whole experience led me. I was not planning on specializing in toxic relationships when I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole experience as I was doing, right before I was doing my thesis to graduate, I switched to toxic relationships and ended up doing my thesis on that. So I was not planning on, even though I had trauma that later came up in my own healing that I didn't remember because it was in my subconscious, I still ended up specializing in toxic relationships and ending up in a toxic relationship myself. And that's kind of what led me here, just going through that terrible experience of being in a toxic relationship. And also not having anyone at that time to support me. Nobody really, I mean, this was about 7 years ago. At that time, narcissism was not a buzzword. And I didn't even know what narcissistic personality disorder was. I didn't know anything about toxic relationships. I only knew about like touching the surface of that, considering I was in school for psychology, but I had never experienced it to my knowledge. So yeah, I didn't really know what I was getting into until I was in it. And, you know, nobody specialized in it, so nobody could help me. Like I would go to therapists and it was really just talking about the day-to-day things that were occurring. Like, oh, today he did this and today he did that. And nobody was inspiring me to look within, that to kind of figure out, why was I even showing up in this relationship? Like, what was I getting out of it? And how was I showing up to make that toxic relationship or dysfunctional dance continue? So one of the reasons I decided to step into this work is so that other people who are going in that same merry-go-round as I was could have help, like specialized help, because a lot of therapists, and they mean well, of course, but they sometimes give life-threatening advice to people in toxic relationships. I had one client actually who was seeing a therapist for a long time, and she told my client to stay in the relationship that was extremely abusive and toxic because it didn't seem like the right time for the abuser, because he was going through some family stuff, to be broken up with. And again, like that, I know, I'm sure this person meant well, but it could have had devastating consequences.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's why I really chose to go down this path.
Right. Well, yeah, I've been a therapist for a couple of decades now. I've heard therapists saying the wrong things, but that one is pretty bad.
And the problem is I've heard hundreds of things like that. And I mean, even lawyers too, and I know they're looking out for the person's financial well-being most of the time, but even lawyers have given some of my clients who are in extremely emotionally abusive and even stalking situations the worst advice, like, oh, it'd be better for you if you stayed another 5 years. But meanwhile, the person is completely breaking apart, like losing their sense of self, a stick because they're not eating. Like, it's really horrible.
Issues. Yeah. So I'm guessing that part of your work is the things that you did on your own healing journey or wish you had done on your healing journey. Can you share with us what your healing journey was like and how you help your clients with that now?
Yeah, so I knew that, well, actually, I didn't know right away. I remember my ex saying to me, you act like you're such a victim. And I remember thinking, but I am a victim. And as I was so I started going to Barnes and Noble and just getting my hands on even more psychology books and things about emotional abuse and trauma. And as I was reading, I learned even more that I had a part in that dysfunctional relationship. Whereas before, my therapy sessions were all about blaming him and how awful he was and the things he said and everything. And it just wasn't helping me ultimately. And I was still extremely triggered by certain things that would happen between us. So I started to realize that, wait a minute, I am part of this dynamic and there are things about me that I need to heal. And those things actually were things from my past that I didn't even remember. They were all stored in my subconscious. So I started to do this work called IFS, Internal Family Systems, with a mentor, and she's also a therapist. And that work completely transformed my life. And I started to rewire my brain and really dive into those subconscious programs that were solidified when I was a child that, made me have the beliefs that I'm not enough, or I'm not seen, or I'm not heard. And as a result of having those beliefs, I showed up in relationships in a disempowering way, trying to prove myself.
Right.
And so when I realized that and did the healing on that, it completely changed my life. And I had already known that I wanted to specialize in toxic relationships. Like I said, the end of my degree, I changed to toxic relationships and did my thesis on that. But after I did all that work on myself, it inspired me to create programs for people who are going through narcissistic abuse or healing from it, or even showing up in their relationships in a dysfunctional way where they didn't know the cause. And it's been like a wild ride since then, but I'm still every day doing my own healing because I believe that we can heal, we can grow for our entire lives. Like there's always personal growth to happen. And I'm still continuing to use IFS in my own life, but also bringing in that to other people's lives. And it's been incredible and incredibly rewarding too.
Right. So for our listeners that aren't familiar with internal family systems, are you versed enough, or is I'm not sure if you're using it every day and know it super well, but what about it are you comfortable with sharing with the audience? I know there's like the critic voice. I've used it a few times, but I'm still learning it. What are you able to help us with in understanding it?
Okay, yeah. So what I do with my own clients, I call parts work. So it's not exactly using the modality of IFS, but I kind of created my own process.
Love to hear it.
Based on IFS. And so kind of how I explain it to my clients is, how you'll say a part of me feels whatever you feel. And then another part of me feels something completely different. And what I explain to them is you have these parts within you. So you have yourself, you have Karen, and then you have these other little subtypes of Karen. And those, we'll say little people, like have those little parts of you have beliefs about themselves and stories, and they show up in ways that could be limiting, or they could have like some of them are protectors, so they're trying to protect you, and then some of them may not believe they're enough, and so they all kind of like come to the surface when you're triggered. So I guess when somebody's trying to think of an example with my clients, if they're feeling rejected, say, the part of them that might be triggered could be a part that's not feeling seen. And so as a result, that part within them is activated and kind of taking over them. And IFS, or the parts work, what I do, focuses on getting to know that part's story and its beliefs and really just getting curious about it. And it's so powerful because when you give attention to those parts that are needing your attention, they relax back and they calm down.
They don't act out as much.
But exactly. But if you ignore them, it's like a child. If you ignore a child who's trying to get your attention, what is that child going to do? They're going to become even more activated. They might start screaming. They might be pulling you. And that's exactly what happens with these parts. And the work, literally like within 12 weeks of my clients working with me, they feel completely different. And they've been able to essentially tame their parts because they're giving them attention finally, where they have spent decades trying to push down these parts that are trying to get attention from them.
Right. Yeah, they were worried maybe that it made them crazy or
it was just too painful.
Yeah.
Like if you're feeling less than, most people want to just push that down. Like, I don't want to feel, even me sometimes, if I'm feeling that way or angry or whatever that uncomfortable feeling is or thought, people often want to push it down. And like bouncing a basketball, the harder you push it down, the higher it's going to bounce and pop up. And that's the same with your parts. The more you push them down and ignore them, the more they're going to come up and flood you.
Right. Yeah. I love the part of your story where you hung out the library, or the bookstore.
Yeah.
I love books as well. What books do you remember reading that were foundational or fundamental in your healing journey? Like, what books do you recommend?
The first one that comes to mind is Women Who Love Too Much. That really resonated with me. There's actually a part in the beginning. I actually have the chills just thinking about it. There's a part in the beginning, it's the foreword, and it essentially says, you're a woman who loves too much if, and then it gives a whole bunch of reasons. And it's like checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. When I read it, it just resonated so deeply. And it is about people who are in dysfunctional dynamics with alcoholics. However, that wasn't my experience. And I still felt that it was one of the most powerful books I've ever read.
Yeah. It's a great book. I read it many moons ago. Do you have another favorite?
Yeah, I'm looking over my bookcase. The Body Keeps Score is a classic in trauma therapy. You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza. That one is about essentially your thoughts create your reality and moving beyond that so that your subconscious doesn't limit you.
That subconscious is so damn powerful. It really still blows my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, it's responsible for 95% of what we do. And your subconscious is programmed between the ages of 0 and 7. So as much as you want to change the odds, like you only basically have that 5% chance because the subconscious is what's on autopilot. And I give the example actually of hanging my coat up. Now, this is a very silly example, but like most people are like, what does a coat have to do with toxic relationships? But I had this bad habit of throwing my coat on the couch whenever I got home. And this is something I did for years. I mean, from childhood into my 20s, even into my 30s. And, it would always be on the couch when I wanted it. But I got to the point where I was like, okay, I am sick of having my coat on the couch. Like, I want to put it in the closet. But 95% of my brain was putting it on the couch over and over and over again. So in order to change that very ingrained habit, I had to exercise that 5% of my conscious brain. And so I had to be very mindful about it. And this took us a few weeks where I'd have to stop myself from throwing it on the couch and putting it in the closet. So there was this one day where I was like looking everywhere for my coat. I could not find my coat, like on the couch, under the bed. Like, where is my coat? And I finally just determined I'm going to have to wear a different coat. So I opened the coat closet, and what do you know? There was my coat. And, I forgot that I had retrained my brain to hang it up, but I was still programmed to look on the couch for it. So what does that have to do with toxic relationships? Well, you really have to reprogram your brain from thinking a certain way, such as I'm less than or I'm not enough, or from even answering the phone when somebody toxic calls you and you're used to answering all the time. So it's really about just shifting that subconscious brain and using your conscious brain more often. And the more you use your conscious, you can shift those beliefs and thoughts and habits in your subconscious to healthier things,
right?
Like hanging up your coat.
No, I love the example. I think people really respond well to hearing metaphors, and I think it also drives home the point of, yes, the subconscious might not be something we understand super well, but learn about it, keep studying it, keep reading, just because it's buried there doesn't mean it's impossible or hopeless to find or work on. Hope and change are always possible.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite parts book or family systems books, or just Dr. Schwartz's stuff, or do you have another favorite author?
Parts is his recent book, and that's a very powerful and user-friendly book for people who are not in the psychology or therapy field.
Yeah, that's the one I'm 3/4 finished with now.
Yeah. That's definitely the best one, I think, for listeners to read.
Okay. All right. And so other helpful tips about your healing journey, other than this particular type of therapy, what else was helpful in your healing?
Surrounding myself with people who were going through something similar. Turning away from the people that didn't understand, because no matter how much explaining you do, some people truly just won't understand. I think also trusting your own intuition. 9 times out of 10, people who have ended up in a toxic relationship had a gut feeling from the beginning.
That's right.
And oftentimes we have a gut feeling, we doubt it, then we go ask somebody else for reassurance or to talk it through. And that person, even though they mean well, they might say something like, you're overthinking it. Oh, like he means well, or he's a good guy, or she's a good woman, whatever it is. Because I have plenty of men who are in toxic relationships also, or who have been. So I think really trusting yourself is crucial in the whole journey. And any of those subtle intuitive hits that you might get about somebody, to listen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so you mentioned that you have, is it a 12-week program, or that's just the length of your sessions?
Yeah. So many of my clients, well, I have a 3-month commitment of working together, because I know how that's how long it takes to really transform and do this work of shifting your subconscious programming and healing. So it's 12 weeks, and it includes weekly calls with me and modules so what I realized was I was spending a lot of the time with my clients teaching them about toxic relationships, or even about the subconscious. And it was preventing us from really utilizing that hour to do the healing work. So I started to record trainings so that they could just go into modules and listen to the trainings and then come to session, and we could really get into the work.
Right.
So that's what the program includes, and also includes texting support in between sessions. So if there's a trigger that the person is having difficulty working through, they can message me. Or if they have a fight with their mom, they can message me. And people who are going through a divorce, for example, and they don't know what decision to make in the divorce, they can message me. And I find that to be extremely valuable for people who are experiencing trauma or toxic relationships, because it's not just a 1 hour a week type deal. It's every day.
Right, for sure. Okay, so anyone that's interested in your program, how do they reach you? What's the easiest way?
The easiest way is to email me, and that is at, should I do my email now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Angelica, Angelica .Griegel, GRIEGEL @gmail.com. Or I also have a Facebook page. It's just my name, first and last name, Angelica Griegel -- the Toxic Relationship Expert. You could DM me on Facebook, or you could DM me on Instagram, and my username is the Toxic Relationship Expert. So pretty easy to find me.
Awesome. Thank you for all that. And as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or wisdom for our audience who may be currently in a toxic relationship? Is there a tip that you could give them?
Don't try to work through it by yourself. I worked through it by myself because I felt that I didn't have anyone who understood what I was going through. Now, 6 to 7 years later, there are many experts, including myself, who specialize in narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships and trauma, and can help you through it. And it would be a much faster way through. I mean, it took me years. I wouldn't prescribe that to anyone. I did that because I had to. But get professional help is what I recommend. Don't try to do this on your own.
Yeah. And I also like what you said earlier too about surrounding yourself with supportive people.
Right.
And healthy relationships.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I am really appreciative of having you here today and your wisdom, and people will know how to reach you. Your information will be in our show notes. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.